mentioned that the majority of the people that died in Jamestown were Black women. Can you go into that a little deeper? Because I don't think that the general public, when there was communication, they just said a lot of Black people.
Mhm.
They never even said percentages. I mean, I've seen percentages as high as 80%, 75 to 80%
That's
were
true.
Black people. The
That's right.
majority were Black women. So tell
That's right.
me, explain that to me. That's just
I,
incredible.
you know, my mother was a business owner. I grew up in an upper middle class family. Once my parents divorced, my mother moved from San Francisco to Santa Rosa. She had a care home for mentally ill patients for Napa State Hospital. She had her own business. She was home with us always. And so when she divorced, she wanted to be home with us. And so I don't know what was missing from her, because of course you don't talk about those things as a kid back in the 70s why your parents divorced. But my sister was on drugs, and that's how we got to Ukiah, my sister Michelle. So eventually my mother just decided to move. So I don't know what was missing in her life that she moved us from Santa Rosa, sold the business, sold the house into Ukiah, bought a house, and then sold a house. And my brother and I ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment. We had never lived in an apartment. My mother and I shared a room, and my brother had his own room. So my mother had already bought in. So I didn't understand, because I was a child that came in, what the appeal was. But what I realized is that there was something missing in her life, and People's Temple gave her a sense of safety, a sense of belonging, a sense of community, a sense of trying to make the world a better place, right? That was the tenets of People's Temple. So I say, first of all, People's Temple wasn't a church. And I say, basically, the people were the disciples of Christ, not Jim Jones, right? Because they truly, the majority of them wanted something better. And so we were in the turbulent times of the 70s with the Civil Rights Movement. We had the Vietnam War, we had the Black Panthers, we had the SLA, we had the Muslims, Nation of Islam. There was always different groups trying to do, I believe, good work to make our world a better place and safer for our children. My mother just got caught up in that. And so I never had the conversation of why she joined. I know when Jim was talking about having sex with men and women in the pulpit, that I think would have been the time that she grabbed our hands and ran, but she didn't. And so she stayed. And so I think the appeal was just the fact that People's Temple reached out to everyone. And in San Francisco at that time, there was a lot of turbulence as far as racism and women being mistreated, and they just felt safe. When I tell you that in a church after a service, downstairs women could have all their own vending, right? The hot dogs, the cookies, the fried chicken, the ice cream and waffles, the clothing. They were able to actually expand on their entrepreneurship, and that was an appeal too. However, I think it got to the point to where I would say they compromised so much, and they had given so much. So my mother ended up living in a commune with 3 other women, giving all her income. And there were so many women that did that, but they still felt a sense of community. And I believe that all the horrific punishments that were received, and the fact that after a while, I knew at 18 something was wrong with Jim. There was something wrong with this picture. This man is very sadistic. The people are sadistic. I looked at the leadership. It's all white. Where are the Black folks, and who are supporting this venture? But I think they gave so much they couldn't see past that. It's almost, they compromised, right? They're like, okay, I cannot believe that no one felt something was wrong when we had to sign blank pieces of papers for confession in case we left. They could say, oh, they could write, and I murdered somebody. I was a pedophile. I was a thief. We willingly did this, right? So that was that toxic leadership, toxic fellowship, basically. And so I think they just gave too much. And I think we wanted Jim's approval so much because we started calling him father. And at that point, I couldn't relate to that until when I came back, I was in a very abusive relationship. I had this sign on my head that said damage, naive. And I ran into somebody that took advantage of it. And when he used to beat me, I would feel bad, and it kept happening, breaking me down, breaking me down, breaking me down. And I'd say, well, what was I doing wrong? It must be me. It must be me. And then you say, then you make up, and he's like, I'm sorry, right? I'm sorry for doing this. And then you say, okay, you remember the good times. That was People's Temple. People's Temple was an abusive relationship. It was an abusive relationship. And so at that point, I just believed, as I said, the women found a safe place to be to a certain point, and they just chose to ignore everything else, similar to what we're dealing with now in our current political situation.
It's interesting you talk about that sense of community, because when I was doing the research, you could see where they had a sewing area. You could see where they made toys. I mean, they actually came up with a productive work environment to keep you completely enclosed in this area. And I'll be able to show the audience how you see this one road coming in, and you have this sign, like welcome to Jonestown. But if you look at an aerial view, you can see you're just surrounded by nothing but jungle.
That's right.
You truly were in a remote location. And yet when you're in your area, you don't feel that way, because there's the basketball court, there's the playground, there's all these nice amenities that would make you think it was a resort. But behind that, you noted the bathrooms didn't give privacy, the showers didn't give privacy. So some of the basic things that you would have had in terms of privacy, you gave that up too.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Right.
Okay, your book.
Yes.
And this book, what I'm going to put it up on the screen as well so everybody can see it and let them know how to get your book. You called it The Slavery of Faith, and it chronicles your struggle through People's Temple to Jonestown, and actually your re-engagement to society, because none of those things were easy for you. What has life been like? You've talked about, abusive relationships, and life has not been easy because you didn't get treatment. There wasn't a group of people that said, you're going to have post-traumatic stress, syndrome. So we need to make sure that we get you help. None of that was done because they treated you like a criminal instead of a victim.
Right. Well, there was a group that was assigned to us, but I didn't trust anyone. I didn't trust anyone. There were some people that, there was services set up in San Francisco, but I didn't trust anyone to talk to. I just didn't. And so no one said, my grandparents didn't push me because they didn't know. But I think I suffered, I suffered every day for years. I didn't want to get up. I really was suicidal at one point, but I wouldn't take my own life. I would put myself in situations that hoping somebody else would do it for me. And that's how I felt. It was so painful to live, although I put in the effort because I had other children, and I tried to, be a better mom, and that failed in many ways. And I tried to be happy. That only my children made me happy after I realized what a horrible mother I was at a point. And so I made a decision. I was married. I had a beautiful home. I was living the American dream. I was selling real estate part-time, running a medical office, but I wasn't happy. My soul was just crying out. My soul was crying out. And I knew that I had to build a special personal relationship with God. Now, I joined churches, but I was suspicious. Every time I go in, I was looking for something like, oh, why is that man there? Looks like a security guard. So I couldn't get past that, but I realized that in order for me to grow, because I couldn't leave this world not being connected to the source, to God, to Jesus. I just needed that. I needed that. And I thought, I owe this to my family. I owe this to my family. And so I divorced because I could not do what I needed to do in this relationship. And I knew I was going to take a financial hit. I was ready for it. And I moved to Atlanta and I got quiet and I got a job and I started writing and crying and trying to heal, every time I put my foot on, off the bed, I thought, oh my God, another day. That's how I felt for years. Another day, I have to suffer another day. That's how, hurt and traumatized I was. But I made a personal decision that I wanted to develop a relationship with Christ. And I was always on the fence because of Jim Jones' teaching. So I was confused there. And so once I made that decision, I studied, I prayed, I read, I isolated. And then one morning I woke up and I put my feet on the ground and I thought, oh, I can breathe. I can breathe. I can breathe. And so the decision it was tough and it's still ongoing, right? This decision to create a personal relationship with God, to try to be the best person that I can, to reach out to people who are in pain and share the story and let them know that, we look for things on the outside to fulfill us when it's all in here. It's all in here. It's all in here. And so with that, I keep moving forward. And sometimes it's difficult. I'm not saying that. There's days when I don't want to do an interview. I don't want to talk to anybody. I go through those moments but when I put God first, then I'm like, okay, because this is a testimony to the power of belief, because there was a year before, almost a year before Jonestown, the tragedy, I was so disgusted. I was out in the back looking up at this beautiful Guyanese sky. And I said, Lord, let this be my last year here. Now, I wasn't sure if there was still a God. I thought maybe God's not going to listen to me because I'm calling this guy Father, right? And I prayed that prayer, not knowing whether or not it would be answered. And it was. And so this is a testimony to the power of belief and not giving up when you want to. I was angry for a long time ago. How could you let this happen? And then why me? Why me? Why not my brother, who is this incredible child? Oh my gosh, my brother was so incredible, as was my sister. Why me? And I was angry at that because now I have to live a different life. Eventually I have to get it together, right? And then that change is difficult. And so I'm grateful every day for what I've experienced. One woman came up to me and she said, baby, she said, you've had the most horrific life. And I said, have I? I said, but I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here at this very moment right now had I not gone through what I went through. And so the purpose is for me to educate and try to share the story, because there are many cults still out there, because nobody joins a cult. They don't. They're recruited. I recruited. We were recruited. And I went out and recruited people because I believed at 15, 16 years old. And so if we don't tap into the spirit within us and develop that personal relationship, we are going to be misled, because what I call that God sense, that's what I was feeling. And every moment since then, when that God sense kicks in, I do not doubt it. Whatever the spirit says, move, I move. Go left, go right, go up, go down. Say this, don't say this. I listen to the spirit, and it's a constant practice. It doesn't happen overnight, but you have to trust. And once you trust, right, then all things are possible. And they just are. And that's why the book Faith is so important, because I have faith. I still have faith. And not saying it's not shaken at times, but I pull myself back in. Like, you got to remember who you report to.
Leslie, your website, and I want to direct people to your website. It's lesliewagnerwilson.org, and I'll put that on the screen so people can see that. You talk about soul restoration. Mm-hmm. Is that what the majority of your work focuses on? And can you kind of walk me through, when you talk about restoring your soul, you certainly have gotten to a place where you restored, you needed restoration.
Mhm.
How are you giving that message to other people?
Mainly, it's sometimes it's one-on-ones. People call, they'll make an appointment, we'll have a conversation over the phone. We might have two or three. There's people that have reached out to me that I've called just because the spirit just, they give me phone numbers. So I call this one woman. She said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you called." I said, "But you left your phone number. Is it okay?" She goes, "Yes." But she goes, "You called at the most, I was having the worst day ever." And it was the worst day for her. And so I just follow the spirit. So people, I like the one-on-one interactions because I can develop a relationship with people. I'm not a licensed therapist. I just share my story and how I got through. And everybody's journey is different. But in order to, if our soul's not restored, we don't live a fulfilled life. We can't. We can't. We can't.
What do you think is missing?
One of my goals, I'm sorry, one of
No,
my
that's okay.
goals is when I leave this world, I want to hear, Pop Winans said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's what I want.
Leslie, your story, I think about your loved ones. Uh, the US government, they had these helicopters. They did a lot of photo ops that they were airlifting and bringing those bodies back. Did they bring your family back?
They did. And, when you mention that, every time I see those bodies, I search those bodies for my family. Every time. I'm looking for some remnant. I know what my mother had on that day. I'm looking for some to say that's my parents. They flew back, they flew my family to Delaware. My father retrieved my sister and my brother's bodies. You cannot open the caskets. My mother and the children are buried at Evergreen in Oakland. What was interesting about that was that my brother weighed more than my sister, which was impossible. My sister was like 5'10". My brother was my height, 5'3". And so they just they were not identifiable. They weren't. So they just said, "Here, got names," and sent them off. But at least they got a decent burial, they're in the Bay Area, with a headstone. But nobody wanted the bodies. Nobody wanted the bodies. No one in the United States wanted the bodies except for Evergreen Cemetery in Oakland said, "We'll take them. We'll take the bodies." Isn't that something?
You always, from day one when I talked to you, you always were very reverent of the other people there. You just always said you wanted to make sure you represented them. And I want to tell you, you do, you have. I think your story is compelling. Just your personal ability to just survive. That's just all I can say is you're a survivor. And you knew that you couldn't do that alone. You knew that there had to be something much bigger and much deeper than you. And I see this joy in your face in spite of tremendous suffering. And I had to tell people, get her book because you'll see she was spunky.
I was.
There were points in that book where I'd be like, "Oh my, she's not gonna do it." And people stumble because you always had this strong sense of who you were and what you were gonna accept and what you weren't gonna accept. And so when I read that and I know that you survived, I know that's why you're a survivor. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with that you just think is so important for them to take away? I know that they're in a couple of weeks, they're going to be able to call in and actually ask you questions, but if somebody doesn't get to make it back on, what's that thing that they need to take from all of this and what you learned?
I would like to say that, it's very easy to fall if you're not in a good place. It's very easy to fall prey to predators. And they come in all forms and all shapes, all races. You have to be very careful of who you connect with and not being paranoid. But I would say if you feel something's wrong, and trust that because that's your God sent speaking. There are many, there's many cults. They don't call them cults in mainstream religion, right? We see it on many fronts. And so it's important that you remember who you report to. If you're a believer, and even if you're not a believer, if you have a sense of morality and a sense of what's right and what's wrong, that's all you need. But it's our purpose, I believe, in this world to serve each other in a way that is going to bring us light and bring us forward and bring us love. We've put so much focus on material things, and when people say, "What do you do?" They don't say, they say, "Oh, I do this for a job." Say, "Oh, well, I'm a compassionate person." Let's change the terminology, right? I'm a being that I'm trying to be better, or I'm trying to show more love. The characteristics should be internal, not on the outside, because that's not what God's looking for. God doesn't care. Jesus doesn't care about all that, right? It's the soul. It's the soul. So I hope that people take away and know that this can happen to anybody. You may not think it can't. And if there's anyone that is suffering or going through this, feel free to reach out to me if you want to provide the web page. There's a contact there. If you feel like you want to talk about an experience or an organization that you're in that you might think is a cult, and you see that there's cult-like tendencies, and then reach out. Because and it's very hard to leave. It's very hard to get out of a situation, especially when family members are in there also. But just be mindful and be prayerful and trust your God sense. It's there for a reason.
Leslie Wagner Wilson, you have been an outstanding spokesman for the people of Jonestown, and they're the people. And I would encourage everyone, if you don't know this story, read it, and read it with a different level of compassion than the compassion that survivors were shown when they came back, because not everybody went willingly.
That's right.
Not everybody went willingly. So
That's right.
we can't judge the situations under which people went. Thank you so much for coming on Tabernacle Talks. And we're going to see you in 2 weeks when people can ask you questions.
All right. Perfect. All right. God bless. Thank you.
God bless you.
You take care.
You too.
Thank you.